This is Amy, and you're listening to the Talkin' Appalachian podcast. So this is a week before Christmas, and I thought I would take a little time to talk about some Appalachian Christmas traditions and words associated with those Christmas traditions, and see how many of them you recognize or maybe that you practice. So the first thing I want to talk about is a saying that I came across that I had heard but not very often, and I wanted to dig into it just a little bit more and understand the history. The saying is, a green Christmas makes a full graveyard, or a green Christmas makes a fat graveyard. Now, this has its roots in health, in weather lore, and I guess maybe a little bit of superstition. What it refers to, and it comes from English and Scots-Irish settlers. It has European roots, as a lot of our words do. Winter was a matter of life and death back in the day. Snow was seen as a protective type of weather. It insulated the earth, it insulated the crops, and it was it was considered like a cleansing. And without the snow, damp and milder conditions were believed to encourage the spread of illness. And that's something we're dealing with right now in Central Appalachia. We're doing these wild swings back and forth between 30 degrees and 65 degrees. Today it was 60 degrees. It's probably going to be 30 degrees by Friday. And so these crazy, pendulum swings of weather keeps everybody sick. At least that's what it feels like. So similar sayings tie warm or green winters to illness or deaths. Like in Scotland, for example, they would say a warm winter will bring a sickly spring. And in Germany, they would say Christmas in mud brings death in the blood. And so you wanted it to be a white winter. Another saying would be a green winter means a white Easter. So they foretold bad weather to come if you had a mild Christmas. Cold, snowy weather believing to kill off harmful germs and diseases and offering a layer of protection. Candles in the window is another common practice in Appalachia today, but settlers would do this because it was a sign to visitors that people in the home were awake and ready to welcome guests. Now they're solar or electric or battery powered, but people still consider it an important Christmas tradition to light up their windows. And a lot of people light up their windows year-round. One observation around Christmas is related to the Star of Bethlehem, which is from the Nativity story in the Bible. And people look for this particular star. It was said to have guided the wise men to the birthplace of Jesus. So in Appalachian culture, it's sometimes seen as miraculous and divine, a symbol of hope, guidance, and renewal. And it's easy to see, particularly in the rural parts of Appalachia where you don't have urban light pollution. Okay, let's talk about the phrase hard candy Christmas. You've probably heard the country music song, Hard Candy Christmas. It's the title of a Dolly Parton song, but long before Dolly sang those lyrics, it carried deep meaning in the mountains. A hard candy Christmas paints a vivid picture of a simpler, leaner time, a Christmas without luxuries or abundance. In Appalachian culture, hard candy like peppermints, ribbon candy, and those colorful little sweets that came in tins was one of the few affordable treats for families during Christmas. Life in the mountains was tough, especially in the late 19th and 20th centuries, early 20th centuries. Many families lived off the land and money was tight. And during the holidays, there wasn't much to spare for lavish gifts or feasts. I mean, it wasn't endless ordering on Amazon like we're doing today, or, shopping from chain store to chain store. Hard candy was a simple but cherished part of the holiday. It wasn't about what you didn't have, it was about making the most of what you did have. Dolly Parton brought that phrase into popular culture in her song Hard Candy Christmas, which she recorded for the 1982 movie The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. The lyrics describe a woman facing heartbreak and uncertainty, but still finding the strength to move forward. It's not a Christmas song. It's a song about hardships. She says, "I'll be fine and dandy. Lord, it's like a hard candy Christmas," resonating, with anybody that's ever struggled through tough times, but kept a glimmer of hope alive. So if you know about Dolly Parton, you know that she grew up in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains, which are not far from where I live, and the phrase was really personal for her. Her family was poor, and she often talks about how her parents made Christmas special in spite of their circumstances. So a piece of candy or a homemade doll might not seem like much, but for Dolly and for many Appalachians, it was a symbol of love and creativity and making the best of what you have. She would go walking with her dad to find the perfect tree, and they decorate it with whatever they had laying around the house instead of lights and ornaments. In the early days, we didn't have electricity, she says, so we used to go out in the woods with my dad in the afternoon, find the best tree that we could, and take it back to the house and decorate it with whatever Mama could find. Buttons, popcorn, anything that we could have was great, and those days were great. Mama would always tell Christmas stories, read the Bible, and we'd go out to the barn, and they would tell us that at midnight the cattle would kneel like an honor, but we never could stay awake long enough to see it. The adults in my family, when we get together, we don't exchange store-bought gifts anymore. We decided several years ago that we all had enough stuff that it was really hard to buy for each other because, once you're grown and you have pretty much everything you need, it's hard to find unique store-bought gifts that are meaningful. So we decided that we would buy for the children, but if any of the adults exchanged gifts, our rule was it had to be handmade. And that's really turned out to be a great tradition for us because it makes us think more about the gift that we're giving and the gift that we're making. And you have to plan ahead and take the time to create it. And you're thinking about the individual when you're making it. So, in past years, we've done everything from my husband made everyone hiking sticks from a tree in our backyard, and he measured them to everybody's height and just took the time to make them beautiful and make them distinctive. Another person in my family has made us homemade vanilla and beef jerky. My mom has made us quilts. Even the children have gotten in on it, and the children have made things for everybody. So it's really sweet, and it doesn't have to be anything, elaborate, but it takes us back to a simpler, sweeter time when we didn't have this abundance of stuff, and we use what we have, and we create something that's meaningful instead of just pushing a button and buying it and having it show up on the doorstep. Okay, some of the foods that you'll hear about in Appalachia. One is a stack cake, maybe an apple stack cake or a molasses stack cake, often made with dried apples and molasses. And these cakes, if you make them from scratch, can take hours to make. Sorghum molasses cookies. My family makes German chocolate cake. My mom always makes a German chocolate cake. It was a tradition that my great-grandmother started, and it is the most moist cake you've ever seen, and it's topped with coconut, and it's absolutely delicious. We also make Russian tea, which is a southern tea. You can serve it in the summer cold, or you can serve it hot in the winter. It's a citrusy tea with a blend of cloves and allspice, and it's really, really good. And the smell of that tea just signals to me that Christmas has started. So my grandmother always had a pot boiling on the stove, or she always had a pot going, so that when people dropped by, they would just scoop out a cup of the Russian tea and sit down, and they would chat. Back when people smoked, the men would sit and smoke and have their Russian tea, and and everybody would just be gathered around on Christmas Eve. That scent brings all of that back to me. Now, perhaps the most widely known Appalachian tradition is that of observing Old Christmas. So if you've never heard of Old Christmas, you're not alone, because most of the world celebrates Christmas on December 25th. But in parts of Appalachia, especially in the rural areas, people once marked the holiday on January 6th, and it's a tradition that goes back hundreds of years. Let's talk about what Old Christmas is and where it came from. To talk about that, we have to talk about calendars. Back in 1582, Pope Gregory XIII introduced the Gregorian calendar, which replaced the old Julian calendar that had been used for centuries. The Julian calendar was off by about 11 minutes a year, which might not sound like much, but over time those minutes added up, and so the calendar fell out of sync with the seasons. So Pope Gregory essentially skipped something like 10 or 11 days, declaring that October 4th, 1582 would jump straight to October 15th. And most Catholic countries adopted that change, but Protestant countries, including England and its colonies, were not so eager to do that. Now here's where it gets interesting for Appalachia. England didn't adopt the new Gregorian calendar until 1752, nearly 200 years later. When they did, they skipped 11 days to align with the rest of the world. So people woke up on September 2nd, 1752, and when they went to bed that night, it was suddenly September 14th. So imagine losing 11 days of your life. No wonder people were upset. But here's the catch. Some people refused to accept that change. They clung to the idea that Christmas should still fall on December 25th, according to the old Julian calendar. And when you calculate the shift, that placed Old Christmas on January 6th in the new Gregorian calendar. And when settlers from the British Isles brought their traditions to the mountains of Appalachia, they brought Old Christmas with them. But Old Christmas in Appalachia wasn't just about keeping the old date. It became something more, a quieter, more spiritual celebration rooted in the rhythms of mountain life and deep Christian faith. In many parts of Appalachia, Christmas Day, December 25th, might be celebrated in small ways, but January 6th was when the real observances happened. It was seen as a holier day, believed by some to be the actual anniversary of Christ's birth. Others connected it to the arrival of the three wise men, Epiphany, as it's known in Christian tradition, when they finally found the Christ child and offered their gifts. So Old Christmas was a time of reflection and storytelling and gathering. And maybe there weren't grand feasts or piles of gifts, but the meaning was profound. One of the most fascinating beliefs about Old Christmas is that animals can speak at midnight. It was said that on Old Christmas Eve, when the clock struck midnight, the barnyard would fall silent and animals would kneel and pray. Some believed they would even speak in human tongues, honoring the birth of Christ. Of course, no one dared to sneak into the barn to listen. Disturbing that sacred moment could bring bad luck. I have a little story about this. When I was little, this was something that my great-grandparents told me about, and I actually stayed up until midnight at my great-grandmother's house, where I spent Christmas Eve for many, many years. The whole family would get together and spend Christmas Eve at her house. And I waited with her dog to see if her dog would speak to me at midnight. I really, truly believed that if the animals in the barn, and she lived on a farm, she had animals in the barn, but I wasn't allowed to go out to the barn. If animals in the barn could speak, then I bet the dog could speak. That was my logic. Well, I watched Bubbles for probably an hour, and Bubbles watched me right back and didn't say a word. So in my mind, the animals in the barn were probably praying, but Bubbles wasn't a praying dog. So Old Christmas carries a sense of timelessness. I guess while the rest of the world moved on, communities in Appalachia preserved this unique celebration, and some families continue to observe Old Christmas in the 20th century, keeping the stories and the traditions alive. There are also gatherings called Breaking Up Christmas. And that's a series of celebrations and music and dances that stretch from December 25th all the way to January 6th. So these were times of community where folks would play fiddles and share food and have a good time and just hold on to the spirit of the season just a little bit longer. So Old Christmas matters today because it's a great example of how Appalachians honor tradition even when the rest of the world moves on. And it reminds us that Christmas isn't just a date on a calendar. It's about connection and faith and celebrating life's simple joys. Whether you celebrate Christmas on December 25th or Old Christmas on January 6th, there's something for everybody. Take a little time to slow down, reflect, share the warmth of the season and the people that you love. And remember that the mountains teach us that the old ways still have plenty to say. Finally, let's talk about the Christmas poke or Christmas treat bags that some rural churches in Appalachia still give out. In this case, the word poke doesn't refer to nudging someone. It's a Scottish term for a bag, usually made from cloth or paper. In Appalachia, a poke was something you might carry your groceries in, tote your seeds in for planting, or if you were picking apples, you would get a poke, or in this case, fill it with small treats for Christmas. So a Christmas poke was like a stocking substitute. It was given to children, neighbors, or community members. What would you find? Well, that depended on what the giver had on hand, but a typical poke might include an orange or apple, because back in the day, fresh fruit was rare and citrus fruits were really prized because they were expensive and brought in from faraway places. A handful of nuts, pecans, walnuts, or hickory nuts were common. Hard candy, which we've talked about, and we know why that added a little sweetness to the season. Homemade treats like biscuits and gingerbread cookies, molasses taffy, and small practical gifts like a knitted scarf or a pair of mittens or maybe a wooden toy carved by hand. Now, my memories of the Christmas treat bag are from the small country church that I grew up in. Every Christmas, Santa would arrive at the end of service carrying a box of brown paper bags, like the kind people used to carry their lunch in. Inside those paper bags, we'd find a box of Cracker Jacks, juicy fruit gum, walnuts, and fruit. Now, I was a kid from a middle-class home, and I was able to make a toy list every Christmas. So it's not that I wasn't like Dolly Parton. You know, my childhood wasn't like that. But I can tell you that that treat bag or Christmas poke was so thrilling. Let's talk about the meaning. It wasn't just about what was inside. It was about the thought and the care behind it. In lots of cases in the past, these bags represented all a family could afford to give, but they were given with an open heart. But I think today especially, it symbolizes community and connection. Appalachia has always been a region where people look out for one another, and the Christmas poke was a way to ensure that everybody, especially children, had something to celebrate during the holidays. In some communities, church groups or neighbors would gather to make and distribute pokes, filling them with whatever they could spare. And it wasn't uncommon for pokes to be given out at Christmas gatherings and school plays or left on a doorstep as a quiet act of kindness. So where did the idea come from? So like many Appalachian traditions, it has its roots in European heritage. The custom of giving small bags of gifts or treats during the holidays likely came with the settlers from Scotland, Ireland, and England. In Europe, the tradition of St. Nicholas Day often involved leaving small gifts in shoes or stockings, and this evolved into the poke in Appalachia, a more practical version. Thanks for joining me. I hope you have a wonderful holiday. And remember to keep talking Appalachian.